Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, and in this video I'm going to talk about something I'm asked about rather a lot, and that is sharpening. Not just print sharpening, some prints here, but sharpening for images on the web and all kinds of times when you might want to sharpen an image. Why do I mention all the different sorts? Because one size does not fit all. People say, well, what tool do you use? What software do you use for sharpening? Does the new smart sharpening tools such as Sharpen AI, does that mean that you don't actually need any of your old methods of doing sharpening? No, it doesn't. No more than if you're into woodwork, you would have just one chisel or just one plane. Different tools do different jobs. Different tools are better for different jobs. Now, at a certain point, if you're into woodworking, you can end up with a wall full of planes and chisels and wonder why you've got some of them. It can be a bit like that with software. So practice on things, try samples. If you get, if you can get a free download to try something, see what you think about it. Look at what different people use, because I'm going to go through 3 different tools here that I've used for quite a while. One of them since at least 2004, and I still use it, and why I use them, what sort of things I get, and why they're different, and why that you might choose different types. So I'll start off with the oldest, which is Focus Magic. It's been around for years. I first tested it in 2004. Back then, to sharpen an 11 megapixel image and do shake removal, which it also does as well, took best part of half an hour on a big image on an old Mac back in, say, 2004. Now it works pretty much in real time. It's vastly faster. Computers have got much faster. The graphics processing of things, although I don't think Focus Magic uses offloads processing to a graphics card. It just relies on processing speed, which is obviously massively more than it was nearly 20 years ago. So Focus Magic, there's a little display for them here. I use it as a plug-in on Photoshop. Does two things very well. It does basic deconvolution sharpening. Now this is really good at bringing out fine detail. I've seen it used for recovering detail from pictures of number plates and things like that. And it's been quite widely used over the years, and it's very popular. Not expensive, but it's a great little package. Run it however you want. Sharpening, so it's good sharpening. I still use it for web sharpening and for images when I'm sending them out to clients. Remember that although I show a lot of prints here, perhaps 95–98% of the images I ever take commercially, I never see them printed. They may well be printed, but so I can't just sharpen images for print and send them off because I don't know how they're going to be printed. And as I mentioned when I come up to the next tool, Nik Sharpener, you need different types of sharpening for different print processes. But for basic image sharpening, just giving them that little extra bit of edge without halos and unwanted artifacts and that. I've used Focus Magic for years. It just works. I found it a great improvement years ago over using something like unsharp masking, which is still around in Photoshop. It has its uses, but I found Focus Magic just worked well. So anyway, that's one I've had around for years. I will put links in the notes to this video so you can see some of the articles I've written, because these bits of software go back way before I started making videos. So particularly Focus Magic. Now, Nik Sharpener, I mentioned. Nik Sharpener Pro 3, I think it is, to give its full title. It's one of the Nik Collection of tools. You can, if you've got software that will still run it, you can probably still find the original free Google version out there on the web somewhere. It works fine. DxO have tidied it up. They've done a few tweaks and things, but the basic functionality of it has not changed for quite a few years. Why not? Because once again, what it does well. Too many software companies I see try and add lots of whistles and bells onto their software, add features and things like that to try and get you to buy upgrades and things, and you don't need them. And I find this a lot in software that I think, well, this works, why should I bother updating it? Now, sometimes I'm forced to update it because the computer that I've got won't run it anymore, or various changes like that. But quite often the functionality that I'm going to use hasn't changed. Nik Sharpener, what does it do? Well, I've used it, if you looked at some of my recent examples, videos about making prints, I've often included a run through Nik Sharpener just before printing. What does it do for print sharpening? Well, it brings up the edge sharpness and it slightly raises local contrast. Now, there are lots of different adjustments you can make for it. The important ones, I would say, are to set your printer resolution that you want to set, what you want to print at, and also to set the media type, because the printing that you need on a glossy paper like this would be different to what I'd need on a fine art paper. Subtle differences, but if you look in detail, you can see that the sharpening that's applied is applied slightly differently. Now, there is also another part of Nik Sharpener called Nik Raw Sharpener, or Raw Pre-Sharpener, which when it first came out, and this is 10, 15 years ago, well, more, yeah, 15 years ago easily, raw processing was perfectly functional, but it's come on a lot since then. So the quality of the images that you get out of your raw processing now, and this is whether you're using Camera Raw, Capture One, any other tools like that, they have far more capabilities built into them for getting detail out of raw camera files. One reason I save all my raw files, and if I'm asked to reprint an image, unless it's an exact copy of something, I'll usually go back to the original raw file. Even if it's 20 years old, I'll go back to the original raw file, because there's a lot more can be taken out of files now. You can get a lot more detail out of them. So that raw sharpener, I never used it much anyway, and I just wouldn't use it these days. If I need to sharpen files after I've processed the raw files, I'll more than likely use something else for it. But the print sharpening, there is, as I say, the settings for the paper is important, but also there's an output strength, so an overall sharpening strength that you can adjust. And I've used Nik Sharpener on both of these pictures here. This one here was one I showed recently when I tested the GFX 100S. This is from a 100 megapixel file. This one here is from an 11 megapixel file. The amount of sharpening needed varies. Depends on the print size, depends on a lot of things. This particular image has got so much detail in it that you can clearly see, and you need a hand lens to see it on the print this size, you can clearly see that they're oak leaves from the shape of the leaves on it. The sharpening here, the example I've got shows it's just brought up the punchiness of it, and it'll print a little bit better. With all these things, experiment with print. So if you're not sure of the amount of sharpening, what I do is I move the slider up and then I knock it back a bit, because I want it to the point where I can just see the effects of sharpening. A bit more than that, and there's a chance it'll over sharpen. Now, when you look at images, certainly with these are my sort of computer using glasses, medium distance, not close-up lens, I can only just see some of the leaves on here. Don't get too hung up on absolute detail in prints, because I've said it many a time, nobody who ever sticks the nose up in a print that close and looks at a print for detail and tells you it's only other photographers do that, and they never buy pictures. Yeah, they will happily criticise your work, but they certainly won't pay you for any of it. So take your views of these other photographers with some care. So if you've got someone at your local camera club who insists on telling you that you've over sharpened or something like that, well, you know, leave them there, and if that's what they want, if they want soft images, let them. Sharpening has a point. It reduces, when you print something, you can get some nice detail on the screen, but when you print it, there's a slight softening. Now, part of that is from the ink droplets, part of it's how the printer driver works, but you offset that with a little bit of sharpening. You can overdo it, and you will easily see when you've overdone it. Practice on some small bits of paper just to see the effects of overdoing the sharpening, because then you learn to recognize it. Every image is different. Every image on a different paper at a different size is different. On a different printer, it's different. So you have to actually work out these things. There is no correct amount of sharpening. So if you're ever using some editing software and it offers you a sharpen for print option, just click this button and it will sharpen for print. Well, yeah, it'll probably do it, but will it do it optimally? I would doubt it. So I've got this picture here. This one is 100 megapixel. This one's 11 megapixel. Processing and sharpening is different between them. Equally well, no sharpening whatsoever is required in the cloud areas on this. Certainly this is an 11 megapixel image. It's from an older camera, Canon 1DS full frame, dating mine dates back to 2004. If you were to sharpen up the sky on this, all you would sharpen up would be camera noise, and you get nothing in it. One of the things about sharpening is that if you want to make your image appear sharper, just sharpen the bits that need sharpening. So use whether that's masking or in Nik Sharpener, it allows you to paint in the sharpening. Just apply sharpening where you need it. If you don't apply sharpening here, makes this a bit softer. That's great because it makes this appear sharpener. Same goes through if you're doing portraits and the like. Don't bother sharpening every single bit of somebody's face. Sharpen the eyes, be very careful what you do it. Sharpen maybe bits of hair, highlights, things like that. It gives a perception of sharpness. Remember, it's not just about the actual amount of sharpening you apply, it's what the actual print looks like at the end of it. So yeah, be careful with that. This picture here, for example, was taken with the EOS RP that I'm using for filming this. So it's from a 26 megapixel image. It's a macro shot. These little dried flowers are only 4 or 5 millimeters across. I wanted lots of detail here. However, this is not a stacked shot, so there are parts of the image which are out of focus. Now, I want those out of focus bits soft. So although I have sharpened the image for print, and this was printed on a P7500 I had for testing a while ago, although I've sharpened this for print, I've just painted in the sharpening with a layer and a mask on it. Various ways of doing this with different tools, but I've just painted in sharpening where I want it. The effect that gives is it makes the whole image look sharper, but the softness of the out of focus areas is retained, and that gives a sense of depth, which with an object like this, and I looked at printing this at different sizes, how some photos just need printing at a large size. With something like this, sharpening is a key element in getting the print to look the way you want it to look. So there we go. That's two tools. Nik Sharpener, which I've been using for perhaps 15 years. Focus Magic, which I've used since 2004. What about some of the new tools? The latest one, and one I do like using, is Sharpen AI from Topaz. Now, there are lots of other tools available, so don't say just because I'm choosing these particular ones that I use doesn't mean they're necessarily best, but they're ones that suit my way of working. Sharpen AI, what's the difference about it? Well, it uses machine learning techniques so that the sharpening it applies is, and I hate saying this in some ways, a smart sharpening, in that it can partially invent plausible detail. Now, certainly Gigapixel AI, which I use, and I've shown the two in conjunction with each other in some other videos, when you have tools like that, they are inventing plausible detail. Now, this is based on analysis of millions of pictures. You may be bothered that this is not real in some way, but since when was data as pixels real anyway? It's as real as grains of silver in a film. If you want to go into that along that route, well, you keep yourself busy for a while. I've long ago not worried about what was real or not. Editing's one thing, but actually wondering what the pixels mean, perhaps you're pushing it a little bit far. Up to you what you fancy for it. But anyway, Sharpen AI. One of the reasons I like using Sharpen AI, and this is my RP that I'm using for shooting this, but I've got the photodiox adapter on it, and this is an old Mamiya medium format lens, 35mm f3.5 if I remember rightly for that, and it is shifted upwards. Now I use tilt shift lenses a lot, hence the book I wrote on tilt shift lenses. Now one of the things about tilt shift lenses is that normally when you take a picture, this was taken, I can't remember, this was probably taken with a 70-200 zoom. Looks about the right proportions. This is in Oregon, this picture, high up on mountains somewhere, and no, it wasn't. It was Colorado. Get the right place. It was in Colorado in the fall. Now, with this, the optical axis of the lens, because it's just an ordinary lens, is slap bang in the middle of the picture, assumed I haven't cropped or done anything like that. So you can correct images like this for lens aberrations. Lots of software has corrections for lens aberrations. That's fine. But the moment that you use a shift lens like this, and particularly a fully manual lens that's off an old camera system of that, the amount of correction for sharpening and correcting the image varies across, rather than being radial symmetry to it. So the distortion in this corner is ideally the same as this corner, this one, this one. It's asymmetrical. Now, I found that most image sharpening tools, lens correction tools, don't do terribly well with shifted images. And if I'm going to use a shifted image, and here's an example, well, from when I was testing a lens a while ago, the camera itself is pointing down the walkway to the side of the building. That means the image is offset. It means that the image is pretty good quality in this area here, but this top corner over here is right off towards one side of the image circle of the lens, so it's the very worst image quality. Now that asymmetry is very difficult to fix. Turns out, and this is one of the first things that really convinced me of the usefulness of Sharpen AI before I used it more generally, was the fact that it varied the amount of sharpening and type of sharpening over the picture as needed. So I was able to correct images like this, and it's very useful, I found, in my architectural photography. Now this is sharpening to bring back detail. This is not sharpening for print, so it's a slightly different sort of sharpening. I say the difference, every sharpening type has its use. What you choose to use it for just matches your image. So for a picture like this, in this top corner here, there's detail of the picture with a little bit of lens softness. Now that lens softness has a direction to it, because lenses are not normally in the corners of them symmetrical as to the distortions. If you apply, this was using Sharpen AI, I get a distinctly sharper looking picture. Now, there's still a little bit of loss of detail, but I'm using an old lens on a camera here, and it's turned what would be an interesting lens to play around with into a lens I can actually use for professional work. With a better quality lens on it, there's a picture here, which is also offset diagonal shift. Now diagonal shift is an interesting technique that allows you to play around with apparent perspective and things. Got lots of things on tilt shift as well if you're curious, but it means that I need very little correction in part of the image, whereas top corner I need more correction. That's the sort of thing where I'd use Sharpen AI. It's also very good at handling camera shake. Focus Magic, going back years, that handles camera shake, but it's a uniform shake, so it can handle if the whole image is shifted a few pixels from shake. However, if you've got any asymmetry in that, then it can fall down a bit. Sharpen AI seems to handle camera shake really well. Why should I be bothered as an architectural photographer about camera shake? Because I don't always take a tripod with me. Now, I generally do on a lot of paying jobs, but I work in places as well where I can't set up a tripod and I need to shoot handheld. Now I've got no problem. I really enjoyed using the GFX 100S because it's got image stabilization in it. I'm looking forward to testing the tilt shift lenses from Fuji next year, but I know I will be trying some of those handheld. And even with the image stabilization, you can get a little bit of shake in it, and you may just need to clean up the image a bit. Certainly with just handheld stuff like this in relatively low light. Now, you can push these images a lot, one of the things I found about, but even so, I'm holding out, I'm going to get problems every so often. I accept that happens, which is why I look at ways of fixing it. You could say, well, Keith, you should use a tripod. I said, well, I don't, so that's my lookout, isn't it? It's one of the reasons I've been interested in sharpening and shake correction for so many years. So I've got 3 different tools for different uses. Even Focus Magic, still great for just that bit of sharpening. If I've got a small image I'm going to use on the web or something like that, Focus Magic, really quick, gives a nice good shot, doesn't produce artifacts. And that's one of the things that I'm always concerned about when I'm doing sharpening, is that I don't get halos around things. Now, if I try Nik Sharpener, it also has a structure adjustment. Now, be careful in using some of these localized contrast tools because it's easy to overdo them. But I found that quite often, certainly for black and white prints, where I've got interesting clouds and stuff, I may not be wanting to apply much in the way of detail sharpening to cloud areas, but a little bit of local contrast enhancement can just bring out the shapes of the clouds a bit better. They're all different types of sharpening. So have a look at if you're curious about these, have a look at the links that I put in the video, because there are just lots of different ways of approaching sharpening. As I said, I'm not claiming these are the best tools. And anyone who wants to make a comment of, oh, you should use such and such, yes, you may well be right. It's what suits you. These are ones that I found. Certainly Focus Magic, Nik Sharpener have stood the test of time, and they're still in my workflow from years gone. Sharpen AI, I use it occasionally before I enlarge images. A little bit of sharpening before enlargement can really help. I've got a video looking at a picture of a seagull taken years ago, but that's a really nifty one. So pick whichever tool works, but more than anything, practice with them and remember that one size does not fit all. You need a range of tools to get the best out of things. Of course, you then need to know how to print properly, and it also helps if you're happy with your photographic composition and what you take. They all fit together. So I hope that's been of use and explains a little bit about how and why I use sharpening, different types of sharpening. As I say, feel free to ask questions. It was somebody's question this morning that gave me the idea for doing this particular video. So thanks for watching and hope you've enjoyed it.